Good afternoon and welcome to Titan Talk. Hey guys, thanks for joining me today from our hiatus of not having a couple of shows, and I apologize about that. We had some stuff pop up that pulled me away. So welcome after some time. Today we have a very special guest who I'm always happy to have in the podcast room with me, and if I can drag him on anytime, I'm always glad to do so because he's a wealth of knowledge and he's always exploring and expanding what we do here. But I'd like to give a special shout out to Jan10th, the owner and operator of TitanProtection. So thank you again, sir. Everybody give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
So today, we've talked before in the past about drones. Today, we wanted to go a little bit more in depth about it. With everything that's going on and everything that's changing, we're diving headfirst, and I mean headfirst into the drone side.
Yes.
And the technology behind it and some of the other things that relate to that are fantastic. And we thought this would be a great idea because I know absolutely bipkiss about this. And you're just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to it. So who better to explain it than you? And we'll kind of walk us through from where we start to where we are to where it might potentially finish.
Yeah.
And kind of get a base idea of what we're looking at here. And one of the things I know that Brian is super happy about seeing, and I know some of our officers are, and the team that we have that's working on drones is the autonomous, it's called ARP, autonomous, get my notes here because I'm bad at this, autonomous response and patrol.
Yeah.
See, notes are good for but one of the things I wanted to ask is because we've talked about, in the past when we've talked about drones, we've talked about having someone stand there with a response and be there physically with the drone, which before we got the licensing for the out of sight,
beyond visual line of sight.
Beyond visual line of sight.
Yep.
You had to be there physically with the drone to be able to see it the entire time it was doing a patrol.
Yes.
So I kind of wanted to touch on the difference of that versus being able to do it from beyond line of sight, where we can do it now with the licensing we have.
Yeah.
What's the big difference there that you see with drones when it comes to that, of having that person standing there with the drone versus being able to do it from our dispatch center?
Yeah. No, that's the exact challenge that we have had, and I think what's held it back from a security standpoint. There's no benefit, well, there's limited benefit if the pilot has to be on site flying the drone, which currently to operate a drone commercially, you have to be a licensed pilot and you also have to maintain visual line of sight with the drone. And it's kind of a broken, I mean, the FAA, everybody's hard on them as far as, you know, they can be clunky and have all these regulations, but their worry is as soon as they open Pandora's box and we've got drones flying around everywhere, are they crashing into people? Is there privacy concern? You know, they're trying to mitigate it. And I only bring that up because anybody that's flown a drone knows that the visual line of sight requirement is broken, in the sense that when you put a drone up in the air, you're looking at the screen and looking at what the drone's seeing, not watching it. I mean, you get a couple hundred feet above the ground and you're limited to 400 feet. But even, you know, 100, 200 feet, you can barely see that thing. So it doesn't necessarily accomplish what they're hoping to do, other than it does prevent just a bunch of drones flying around and that type of thing. So for us, you know, if we had to have a person on site to fly the drone, then now you've added costs, right? You have a person and the technology to be able to do it, where what we want to do is let the drone fly around a property, tell us if there's something that needs action, and then have a security person respond. Because no matter what, and we're not replacing security personnel, we're augmenting, we're layering things together to have a better and more efficient, you know, way. But my point being, even with the drone on site, there's still a last mile problem of, okay, we've identified something needs action, somebody's on a property they shouldn't be, somebody has to respond to it, and it's kind of putting those pieces together. So the big hindrance in that has been the beyond visual line of sight. We were the first security company to get a nationwide waiver. You could get a waiver to operate these things, but you have to do it client by client. So client A says, hey, yes, we want to use this, then we file a waiver. The costs are coming down, but they used to be 50 grand plus, and then you'd have to wait 6 months to get it approved and everything else, so it just wasn't efficient. We got the first waiver security company to be able to do that nationwide. which allows us to scale that much more.
And so with that waiver, with it being nationwide, we don't have to file anymore. It's just that one waiver, and that covers any client that we were to get nationwide.
Yes, there are some restrictions within a mile of an uncontrolled airport. There's a couple caveats to it, and there's some altitude restrictions and some other things. But for the most part, and we're capturing, I would say, 80% plus of the available sites or places that we may put it out there. And the FAA is mostly concerned. So you hear maybe about Amazon doing deliveries and packages. They're very favorable to our application because we're on a closed property. We're condensed to that property. When you start talking about delivery, then you run into
that was going to be
deconflicting airspace and aircraft. And
that was going to be my
stuff.
question, because I've heard of Amazon using drones to make deliveries. I don't know if it's gone live or if they're testing it in markets or anything, but I was going to ask with that, that beyond line of sight, is that something that someone like Amazon could do, taking into those restrictions, within the certain distance of an airport, or I would assume that would be like controlled airspace of police precincts or something like that, similar items of that nature. How would that affect a company that wants to do something like Amazon or Walmart that would want to do drone deliveries?
They are in the process of figuring that all out. Right now, Dallas, they have some areas that are authorized for beyond visual line of sight to test things like delivery. Amazon Prime Air actually suspended their operations in Texas this week, either this week or last week, and there's a lot of speculation over why, but it seems to be maybe related to working some bugs out of some things and just kind of cut. But they've had some success stories down there too, where they've had two aircraft, separate companies that were going to collide, that automatically deconflicted and shifted. And so they're in the process of figuring that all out right now, and they're kind of having some tests. What governs drones right now commercially is Part 107 with the FAA. They're getting ready to, and they were supposed to release Part 108, which is remote piloting, and we'll have a bunch of more rules associated with how to operate these things beyond visual line of sight. Because when I say that's the hindrance for us, it's also the hindrance for everybody. Package delivery, inspection. A lot of the use cases have been hindered by some of the regulations, and the FAA is eyes wide open to the need. I mean, this isn't an if, it's a win type of thing, and they're just trying to do it in a safe manner that doesn't kind of open up Pandora's box. The other side that has seen a lot of traction is drone as a first responder law enforcement agencies. They've been using them to respond to calls. They've had some incredible numbers as far as, the drone can get over the scene of a call and clear it. A lot of police officers, you may show up to a call and HBO, handled by officer, or gone already or something. So they're clearing a lot of those calls before they ever have to even send officers. They're also doing some interesting things with Shot Spotter, where they can detect gunshots and they can have a drone automatically deploy and have eyes over that area. They used to be predominantly patrol-led, where a police officer would have the drone in the trunk, throw it up in the air, and fly it around as needed. That has some limitations. If you have three officers, on a scene, one of them is flying the drone, you now have two officers, where if you can autonomously launch it from a docking station, which is the other piece that we needed for all of this to work, you had to have beyond visual line of sight where we could fly them remotely. Then you also had to have some mechanism at the site that the drone can land and charge, because if you had to have a person go out and swap batteries,
it's the same
you're defeating the scenario. And nobody was making docking stations because beyond visual line of sight wasn't a reality. And so why make the docking station? If you have to have the pilot there, they just swap the batteries out and you don't need the extent. So now we're seeing these things come together where we have reliable docking stations. We have beyond visual line of sight. We have some of these things out of the way. So the police departments are now using this too to launch from a drone, from a dock, and they can just have eyes on, and you don't have to tie up a police officer. It's an extra resource, and obviously a lot less expensive than a helicopter unit,
right?
To fly around.
Using that just as an Overwatch as well.
Yes.
Not just like you said, it's a lot cheaper than using a helicopter.
Right.
So taking a drone out and having that ability to use a drone to keep an Overwatch over it makes that all lot safer for them.
You're giving a lot of other people insight to a scene. So command staff, dispatch, they're able to get that overwatch, and be able to get a lot more information and
view it remotely.
Yeah, I think it'll change vehicle pursuits. I mean, obviously, if you're in a vehicle pursuit and you have a helicopter following you, it's pretty tough to outrun the helicopter.
You're not getting away.
And I think that becomes limited to jurisdictions that have helicopters and all this other stuff, where now I think you're going to see this, it's going to be standard in the toolkit police officers have, where they're just going to automatically have eyes in the air.
So what you're saying is eventually we might get to the point where you see an SUV roll by as they're doing a pursuit and they'll launch a drone from the roof of the SUV.
Yes.
The movies do.
We're
come
already
true.
there, but I think what you're going to see more is that you're going to have the docking locations strategically through the city to where they just deployed. That's already happened. New York City just deployed. They're in the process of deploying about 120. They're putting them on the roof of every precinct. What's interesting about that one, and they've got a lot of success stories already of how they're using it, clearing crimes, how they're apprehending suspects. It's the numbers and the success stories are wild. But I think that's where, and it was surprising to see that happen in New York because they have a very complicated airspace, a lot of tall buildings. I think everybody thought this was going to first bubble up from the more rural communities that didn't have a lot of these complications, but NYPD kind of bit it off and led the charge. And so they've kind of been the front runner. Chula Vista is a agency out in California. They were actually the first that kind of pioneered drone as a first responder. It was more patrol led. They were also putting visual observers on the roofs, so they would launch the drone from the dock, but then they'd have to have somebody to fulfill the line of sight requirement. Obviously not very efficient to have somebody stand there. And two, it was BS in the sense that, once the drone gets to a certain height or certain level, you're standing there, but
you can't see it anyway.
And what their purpose was if they see an aircraft to deconflict, so there's a lot of those things that just weren't working. And that's one of my gripes was if we're only flying 400 feet or below, what the FAA is worried about is that if there's an aircraft flying in the area and they have an emergency, that we deconflict and get out of the way. And my standpoint is, if you're at 400 feet and you have an emergency in an airplane, my drone is the last thing that you're concerned with. You got bigger problems.
Coming up quick.
Right, than what's going on. So, no, it's interesting. I will say I've been chasing this since 2014. Most of the forward momentum we've seen with beyond visual line of sight and docking stations, the last 12 months, it's starting to hockey stick, where it's like, from a timing perspective,
just skyrocket up in interest.
Happening. Yeah, it's coming.
That's crazy. Yeah, the thought of using drones when it was first brought to me, just as like hey, this is something that we were interested in. I don't even remember how long ago it was. I'd heard a rumor of it like 2 years ago. I was like, that's really weird. Like, it's a cool idea.
Right.
And then, you start seeing things, you say drone, and you start seeing things where they have those autonomous drones that are the little pillar-looking things that drive around.
Yeah.
And you see those. It's like, okay, but that defeats the purpose because it's not going to do anything.
Right.
There was a company here, a property here that I heard about that was using one, and it's a cool concept and everything, but it doesn't really defeat anything. It's not a visual deterrent.
You're talking the robot?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the robot is a whole nother rabbit hole, and I think there's value there, but the challenge the robot is going to have to overcome is it has to be more cost effective than the security officer, because to your point, there's also a response issue of, okay, the robot can follow you, it can get good video, it can do some different things, but yeah, bad guy's going to look at the robot and go, what are you going to do?
Okay.
Right.
And that was always my thought when it came to that. When I heard about the actual aerial drone, and that we had started taking an interest in that, that's when I looked at it from a positive, extreme positive standpoint, because as we were talking about augmenting what we do and layering it in what we already have, I think of clients that have hundreds of acres, or they have property that's I don't want to say unmanaged or unkept, but it's just property that's really hard to get to.
Right.
And you'd be able to use a drone to be able to search that and look through it and make sure everything's okay there, or search for abandoned cars or things like that. Having that kind of a response and that ability, it's just, we did it more than a few years ago. I remember doing it with one of the other supervisors. We tested it at one of our properties, and we went through and we used it to search.
Right.
and we were searching for trespassers, and it was the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And it allowed us to see things and go places that we couldn't get to.
Right.
Because we either didn't know how to get to that area, or there was no easy way to get to it without putting ourselves in danger.
Yeah.
And so I thought of it from that as being able to augment what you already have and say, hey, not only can it get to from one side to this side much faster than I can,
Right.
it'll allow me to see, is there an actual reason for us to go over there? Is it a gone on arrival, or is there somebody still there? And it allows us to keep an eye on as an overwatch and make sure that we know where that person is. So if they stay on property, I know where they are and I can go to them directly instead of I go here and they've already moved away. I know where they are.
Right.
I have that autonomous person or that dispatcher or that person watching the drone saying, hey, they moved in on the property and now this is where they're located. And
Right.
that's where I saw the value.
And
in
I
it.
think that's very similar when we talked about, police having patrol-led drone as a first responder. The same situation, extends to security, because in that application, I believe we were looking for homeless camps, large property. Same thing, the officer can still use that as a tool. It's not going to replace what they're doing, and they can fly it, but it helps them cover a very large area. That's definitely where drones shine. So there's a couple different applications as well on the security side that kind of mirror that.
Yeah. And that, like I said, that was always kind of where I saw the interest in it. And when I saw we were doing it, I just loved that fact and loved the thought of watching it grow.
Well, and I run into that too, where it's like, I like drones. I mean, drones and security, that's my jam. But I get caught up sometimes on the drone thing. It's like, is this effective, or is it cool? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I want it to, but we're seeing so many successful use cases with it that it seems like it's both, where we're seeing like, this is actually has a place, that serves a function.
It goes back to the old someone told me as a security, everybody wants to be tactical versus the difference between tactical and tactical. It's like, are you doing that because you think it makes you look cool, or are you doing it because there's a specific reason for you to do it?
Right.
And I get the point with drones is there a specific reason, or are you just doing it because it sounds cool and it looks cool? But
I would have that discussion with some of the police officers that are using it, because the same thing could happen, right? There's usually the department has a drone guy, he's interested in it, he builds up a program. Is it actually useful? And most of what we're hearing across the board is, now the officers in the field are asking for it. Hey, do we have a drone up? Do we have a drone operator on? Because it's becoming a useful tool that they can say, hey, I need this, or I could use this on a call. So the utility of it seems to be there.
Yeah. Well, awesome. You touched on this a little bit, and I kind of wanted to talk about it. The FFA rules and regulations. FAA. What did I say?
Future Farmers of America.
FFA. Oh, my bad. I'm from the country, man. FAA. My apologies. FAA. The changes with technology and the rules and regulations and everything. With what you've seen, because you're more plugged into this than anybody I know. With what you've seen from where it started, how well do they keep up with the change? Are they keeping up with it, in tune with the technology, or are they trailing behind because they are not sure where technology is going, or are they trailing behind because there's a bunch of logistics that nobody really thinks about?
I think the FAA gets a bad rap because they can be clunky and bureaucratic, but their main focus, and I think they've been pretty clear about tuning out the noise of, the industry has been clamoring for, hey, you got to get beyond visual line of sight and regulations out of the way. They have a safety focus. And I feel like they have a pretty good track record. I mean, if you look at how safe commercial air traffic is, they do a pretty good job. And especially for, the beef with the government can be, there's no competition, so there's not a lot of innovation, there's not a lot of speed, there's not, that type of thing. So I get both sides of it. I feel like we're behind in the sense that, like, they were supposed to come out with the notice of proposed rulemaking for Part 108 by the end of 2024. That didn't happen. And the challenge with that is, when they put the proposed rule out for Part 108 or beyond visual line of sight, that then just starts the clock ticking where they get public comment. It doesn't become law then. So we're still talking about 18 to 24 months before a lot of this stuff becomes law, which is why the waiver process was so important to me. Was we got to get something that allows us to fly now and be able to scale. Because that was the biggest challenge. We'd talk to customers and we'd say, hey, this is what it costs. This is, how it works. And they'd go, great. But then when you say, okay, well, you're going to have to pay 50 grand up front for a waiver or for this detect and avoid equipment to be able to get it, was a non-starter. So getting some of those boat anchors out of the way is important. And they're trying to balance speed with safety, and that's tough. Everybody's motivations are different and they want it as quick as possible. So it's tough to answer. Are we behind? I mean, it's definitely the regulatory environment is what's holding the industry back. But I also get that if you open up Pandora's box and then all of a sudden, part of what happened with Amazon and all the delivery testing that's going on in Texas, noise is something that's come up. The neighbors are like, the noise of these things. So they're really working on ways to have propellers that don't make the noise. For us, the noise is a deterrent, right? I mean,
I
don't know if you've ever had one of these drones over you, but it sounds like a beehive. And now we have the ability to where you can attach a speaker, a strobe, so you can come down, come through, because we find that from our camera monitoring business, those audio interventions are very powerful.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially for smash and grabs and burglary. If you come across, say, hey, you in the blue shirt, police are on their way, leave immediately or be arrested.
Being able to describe the individual right then and there, it leads this whole new, they're actually looking at me individually. This isn't just some pre-recording. Hey, you in the blue shirt. Oh, that's me.
Right.
Adds that extra little bit to it. I find adding a speaker to a drone, I know the speakers that we use have a very loud decibel, but the speakers is huge. You could, how would
I wouldn't say, I don't know the exact, I mean, typically the speakers we put on our virtual officers are 100 plus decibel. I don't know what they are on the drone, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was 100 decibel. Like, I mean, it's
really,
yeah, I don't think, because they can amplify though, and from a power consumption, that's an interesting question. But to the other, if we have a virtual officer, we can't move that. Where if the drone, say it's 50 decibels, well, we can get closer to that person or fly where we need to be. Where I don't think the sound
from the drone would overpower the speaker.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
It was just
That's a good question.
Good thought. It was a thought I had when you say that, because I've got to experience the drone being near me, and they can be fairly loud.
Right. I think it is a deterrent factor. And when you're talking about the robot versus, there is something about, hey, this thing's, sounds a little bit more intimidating. And I don't know if you've seen what's going on with Russia, Ukraine, and some of those FPV drones where they strap bombs on them and fly. That's terrifying. I don't know if you've seen any of those videos, but like,
I've seen some of the videos, and I've watched. I think the terrifying part comes for me is they know. You can hear the drone coming, and you can see them scrambling. And like, oh crap, this is. Yeah. I know it's coming, and so they're trying to scatter.
Dude, I saw one where it was chasing a soldier, and he ran into a storm pipe to get to run away from it, and it just flew through it had a bomb strap, but I mean, talk about
terrifying.
I mean, I
think I can get away here.
Right.
Uh-oh.
Right.
Yeah, that's when it comes to drones, having that sound absolutely for us is a good thing in the security world, or even for law enforcement, having that sound I think is a fantastic thing, because it adds that deterrent, it adds in that knowledge of, hey, there's a drone watching me. Right. And what we do for a living, I think that's fantastic. I don't think we should hinder that.
Sure.
But as a residential thing, I guess I can understand it, because I get mad when my neighbors start banging on my roof.
That came up too in the whole New Jersey thing. Everybody was going, well, these drones are flying, and if they're legal, they can't fly over my house. Well, they can. I mean, think about it from an airplane. Can an airplane fly over your house? Like, it's airspace, and I get it. These things have cameras on them. They're flying lower, and that is a concern. When we get insurance policies on these drones, I would have never thought that the insurance company would be most worried about the images and the data that the drone is collecting, and are they spying on people, or how are we storing those, and what are we looking at on a property? That's their biggest worry. It's not, is a drone going to fly out of the sky and hit somebody, which originally was the FAA's concern, was what if these things go rogue and just falls out of the sky or hits somebody, and they've had enough of these flights and enough data to be able to look and go. I mean, it's a concern, but in reality, it's not happening. I would think at the same time, though, like if you're looking from like a battery perspective where the battery dies out,
I believe, and nobody quote me on this because I don't actually know. I think you would better than I would. I would just think there's some kind of safety protocol if the battery gets too low that the drone would force itself to go down.
It does.
Yeah,
it does. Most of them have it to where if you get to 20% of the battery left, it will automatically go back and charge itself up. Now, we as soon as 2-3 years ago, endurance on these drones was 25, 30 minutes somewhere, and now we're seeing hour flight times. And so, I mean, the technology is advancing, but the batteries are the heaviest component. So, I mean, it's literally a thing. Right.
Literally.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I never would have, some of this stuff I never would have even thought of knowing.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to see how it all kind of flushes out. The other point I wanted to kind of hit on, I guess, is you said getting that waiver first, because it's a non-starter. And 100%, if I was a client, you were to come to me and say, hey, you've got to dump $50,000 into a waiver, I'd tell you to get out.
Right.
But if you've already got a waiver, it's a whole lot easier to bring that in and say, hey, so here's how we can layer this multi-hit security for you, where you have not only the drones that can respond, but you'll have a physical response to it as well.
Right.
And there's a cost savings to it because you can break it down per client versus saying, hey, I've got $50,000 I need from you. I need $50,000 from you. I've already got the waiver, so you can cut that down. It makes it more manageable and more price conscious, I guess is the way to say that.
Yeah.
And it makes it more I don't know. I can't even think of the word.
I know what you're saying. It's easier, and that's what we've tried to do with it, because it is a complex thing, and I think that's why. Because too, you could look at it and you go, drones. Well, how isn't that bigger in security, or how is it? And I think the complexity of the waivers, the licensing, how you fly them, all of that, and that's how we put it together as a package, where the customer just pays us a monthly fee, and that includes the waivers, the licensing, the pilots, the equipment, the maintenance, all of the headache stuff that goes on, with it, and so we just provide it as a service.
What's the we talked about pilots, and I know we've got a few people on our team on our side for Titan monitoring and for the Titan protection side that are working on that. What's the licensing like for the piloting? What is that?
That's another area that is broken in the way that so the Part 107 test, and I think you could talk to any of our folks that have been through it, it is more geared towards, and the FAA applied some of what they were doing for manned aviation operations and tried to make it for drones because they just didn't have a better model or didn't have a better way of doing it. The test, and I always tell our folks, like, pass the test and then we'll give you the real training, because it asks a ton of questions about METARs and weather and airspace and a bunch of stuff that we're already going to have figured out before they ever, sit in the chair and try and operate or fly the drone. But I think when they come out with Part 108, it's going to be a completely different test. But right now, it doesn't really prepare you to fly drones remotely. It's just kind of a check the box, get the certification, get through it. And it's a written test type of thing, but it's not very applicable to what we do.
Okay. Cool.
But it's changing. And I mean, again, it's easy to throw stones at the FAA, but they're riding the bull and doing the best they can as far as they're trying to figure out, a very complicated scenario and stay ahead of it. There's a whole nother discussion about counter UAV. And I mean, we're seeing that a lot with more enterprise customers, stadiums, different type of thing of, Arrowhead Stadium. How do they keep the drones from flying over the crowd, or some recreational guy that just wants to fly around and get a cool video? And I was at a game a couple weeks ago, and I saw 4 drones up in the air at one time, which were all KCPD, Chiefs. They were all legitimate operators and drones. They were using them for traffic control and just Overwatch type of thing. But again, that is going to be patrol-led, or they've got a pilot on the ground that's watching and kind of interacting with these things.
Okay. Man, there's a lot of rules that goes along with that. It's just it's crazy to see it, and I want to say I wish I was more in tune with it, but with the plate I have as it is with what I do, I really don't. I'm so glad that Captain Roberts was able to take that on and be able to part of that and give that kind of reliability there. And I wish I could have him here as well, so I can berate him with questions. But he had to be at range. So
yeah. No worries.
But it's one of those, I love to see where this is going. You know, this is fantastic to see that not only us, but law enforcement is keeping up with the times and taking something like this and using something like this as an additional tool to make lives easier, safer, and better for not just law enforcement, but for everybody out in the public as well.
Yeah.
But I'm going to let everybody get back to the weekend. I want to again thank you for joining me today and letting me berate you and talk to you and get some information.
Security and drones, anytime. That's my thing.
So everybody, I want to appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. Glad to see everybody came in. If you guys have any questions, throw them in the comments. We'll answer them the best I can. If not, I'll drag Mr. Smith onto him and have him answer them. But thank you guys. We appreciate it. Everybody enjoy your weekend. Stay safe, and we will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks, guys.